Welcome to the Ride With Us podcast, presented by the American Coaster Enthusiasts, the world's largest ride enthusiast organization dedicated to the appreciation, promotion, and preservation of roller coasters around the globe. So please keep your hands and feet inside the podcast at all times as we welcome in your host.
Hello, enthusiasts. If you're like me, you love the sounds of roller coasters, the click of a slow chain lift hill, the whoosh of a launch, the roar of a train whipping by you, and of course, the sound of your heart beating. But how about the sounds that are added into some coasters? Have you ever wondered about those? At IAAPA Expo, Correspondent John Davidson met Devin Flannery, a solution architect at a company called Alcorn McBride. You may not have heard about them, but you've definitely heard or seen their products. They've added audio and video to coasters, attractions, museums, casinos, cruise ships, and more. And Devin agreed to chat with John on our podcast to give us an in-depth idea of what it takes to bring these immersive elements to life.
Hello and welcome to the Ace Ride With Us podcast, where today we're going to do a deep dive into onboard audio on a coaster. And there's nobody better to help us walk through that than Devin Flannery of Alcorn McBride. Devin, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here.
Yeah, I thought it'd be good to, if you could step back and just kind of give us an idea of how you got into the industry and then how you end up as a solution architect.
Sure. So I started off in the industry probably about 20 years ago now. I always had an interest in engineering. My father worked as an AV integrator. So I started off doing that, a lot of commercial things, working for performance venues, stadiums, doing corporate install AV work, kind of general stuff. But as I worked through the industry, I ended up working for a company that did a lot of work for Universal. And so I got in working on the Simpsons ride. I think it's the first big one that I worked on the design for, and kind of fell in love with it then. And so from the last 15 years after that, spent a lot of time working for various integrators like Electrosonic and AVI-SBL, where we focused on, themed entertainment. So doing a lot of work for Universal, Disney, and many others worldwide.
Oh, man, did it hurt you a little bit to see Back to the Future?
Oh.
Is that hard? Sorry, deep cut already, huh?
It is. I live here in Orlando, Florida, born and raised here. So I grew up going to the parks and working on that and tearing all that stuff out really, it hurt a bit.
Oh, I love that franchise. I hope it comes back. I should say that. Okay. So walk us through. I know it's hard to visualize on a podcast, but let's start with the server racks and the whole show control, because I think that lets everybody kind of understand there's a big computer somewhere that's running these rides.
There are many computers. Actually, I think it's better to work backwards from, what people see.
Okay. All right. I like that idea. Let's take it backwards. So let's put us on your favorite dark ride or your favorite coaster that has onboard audio and walk us through backwards then.
Absolutely. You're sitting there, you're in their strength, and all around you have, all these special effects. You have lighting effects, maybe some animatronics, some video playback, the projection or LED stuff. You have, a lot of audio supporting that. So, point source audio for the animatronic characters and background music and things going on and all these special effects. And, how does that all work? Well, behind the scenes, there's a lot of different industrial computers and sensors and different things going on that are all communicating to enable these effects to happen and trying to get them all to happen at the correct times. So, Alcorn McBride, what we focus on is show control, which is it's the main computer that orchestrates all of these different elements. And so the show control system is talking to the ride system. So the ride system is controlling the vehicle, where it's going, what it's doing, life safety. From there, we're getting cues from that. We're getting scene triggers and different data that tells us where the vehicle is within a scene. And we can take that data and then use that with highly precise clocks using like PTP and NTP signals going up across the network to synchronize all the other computers together and all the media servers and different things so that everybody's orchestrated, knows what time of day it is, what's happening, and they can take these cues and then control the animatronics and control the lights and kind of set the scenes and then play back those video files and audio files at precisely the right time.
So you have a digital version of the synchronizer watching.
Yeah, that way.
Okay, so put us on that ride path. Like you mentioned, you're sitting in the ride vehicle. It's your favorite coaster. And the ride control says, hey, it's leaving the station. So it starts down that ride path. What happens then?
So we enter a scene, we get a trigger, and there could be various sources. One of the most common ones for attractions is like RFID tags. So they have a tag, and as the vehicle goes past it, there's a sensor that picks up the tag and reads it. And so it knows that tag is associated with a specific point on that track. And so it then tells that ride control system tells our show controller, hey, we just read this tag in here. And so we know that tag represents, scene 1 or scene 2 or scene 3 or, subsets of that, different parts of those scenes. We can take that, and then our show controllers have sequences. Some of them are timeline based. So it's a show timeline that goes along. And on that timeline, we say we get the trigger at time 0. And from then, a second later, we can have, play this lighting cue, trigger this animatronic to start going. We can have, video playback start going, and then audio playback on the wayside as well as onboard. So we can synchronize across the network and have onboard systems that are, doing audio playback, talking to the offboard system and making sure that they're all synchronized together and doing their different cues as well.
Okay. Well, let's do a deep dive on the ride vehicle before we get too much farther, because one of the products that I think you guys came out with recently was the ability to make those components that are on a coaster smaller. Because I feel like I've heard different, issues in the industry revolving around the amount of weight that it adds to the car. You add onboard lighting and video and all these things add weight to the car. And then you add all the people in the car, and that can change the dynamics of the ride. So how do you guys interact with that? Or what are the components that are on these ride vehicles?
You are absolutely right. I mean, the ride vehicles, especially coasters, weight and volume constraints on these systems. And again, going back to when I started in the industry, 15, 20 years ago, I was working on some onboard systems as well for Six Flags. And a lot of those systems, we were getting different components together. We had car audio amplifiers and like a lot of automotive parts for doing power conversion and audio playback. And it was a hodgepodge of all these different manufacturers, all these different components were wiring together and trying to make work as one cohesive system. It was big, it was heavy, and it wasn't built for that environment. I mean, onboard vehicles, they're, very dynamic. A lot of G-forces involved, a lot of heat and humidity and different things going on that really damage equipment. So Alcorn McBride, the team of engineers here, we developed a product, an onboard show controller and audio player, as well as a lighting player, called a ride player. That system was designed for, dark ride applications. It's very large, has onboard amplification and all kinds of things going into it. So it's a very big package, but it's built for that environment. So it's can support all the G-forces and all the vibrations and everything else. But it's not very conducive for roller coasters. So we've been working on building a new product called the Ride Player X, which is very compact in comparison. So it's very small.
So give me some examples of size-wise for the listeners so they can visualize it. Are we talking like the size of a toaster, or was the original ones more like big briefcase?
The original ones are, bigger than your laptop, I'd say.
Okay.
Probably about, 4 inches tall, probably 20 inches long and 12 inches wide. It's a very large, it's heavy, it's probably like, I think about 12 pounds or so. So it's a very big, heavy metal object, very dense. The new version that we have is, it's about 180 millimeters wide, about 300 long and about 50 tall.
So that's more like the size of like an iPad or something.
It is about the size of my iPad, just a little taller, actually.
Oh, cool. So you went from this huge, trying to picture it in my head, but this huge thing that you had to figure out where you're going to put it, how you're going to mount it so it doesn't get wet, all these things. And now you've got it down to the size of an iPad that you you have infinite, you can hide it anywhere on those, on a coaster train then.
You can. That's the idea too. So we broke out the amplifiers. So we have separate amplifiers that are the same size. And so you put those next to the speaker somewhere in the car. And then it's just a single connection, Ethernet connection that goes between them. And so you get all your control and all of your audio data all across that one single link.
So you create a special product for that. Are you still using I'm going to use the term off the shelf components for the speakers and the amplifier? Or are those also specific to this application?
So the speakers are off the shelf, and it varies depending on client and manufacturer for the vehicles. But for the amplifiers, we designed and built all those in-house, as well as the ride player that's doing all the audio playback and control communication.
And how does it communicate then?
So there's a few different ways you can do it. The most common is using Ethernet. So it's a network connection, like your computer. Mm-hmm. That network connection, you get control data. So different commands going across that, going back and forth. So the ride player, reached out, it talks to the amplifiers, it gets their status, and then it also sends them audio signal over the same connection. So you get 16 channels of audio going down there to all the other amplifiers as well. There are other inputs into the ride player. We can do GPS triggering, so you can take a GPS positional data. So for like a parade or a tram, you can use GPS waypoints to trigger different things to happen. As soon as like the vehicle comes into the area of a waypoint, it'll trigger audio playback or lighting cues or things like that.
Okay, so you started us down the happy path. So now that we've moved, I think you painted a great picture. I think everyone can start to visualize these smaller components, and you're able to put them on the coaster trains in different places, and you start to hide and figure out these speakers to match the theming. So let's go back to the ride path. I think there's a happy path, and then there's sometimes they're called B paths, sometimes they're called loops. How do you start to put that into, I guess, a process that not only does ride control for the perfect scenes, like there's no issues, but then you have to think about all these things that don't work right. So how do you start to put that ride path together with all the alternatives?
So it depends. We have to jump between themes. So, we'll have different tracks that we can trigger. If we don't get a cue in time, we can have it say, hey, we're supposed to get a cue by now. We didn't. So let's play this audio file, loop it. Or sometimes you have it down, right? So the vehicle stop, say there's like ADA requirements. We have to load somebody, so they need more time. Or something fails and you're stuck in a scene. And how do we restart? Well, using all of the PTP and NTP clocking stuff that we're doing, all the cool things behind the scenes that, coordinates all the different devices across the network, we can take data from the ride control system. So we know where that vehicle is precisely within the scene. And if we get a start again, we can say, hey, where are you in the scene? And then that scene data will tell us where it should be within an audio file. We know how close we are to an animatronic figure and where that figure should be at that point, as well as with the audio and video playback. So we can take that position data, set everybody up to start playing at the exact same cue from where we are in the scene itself, and then start playing from there after we get the up again.
Man, that sounds extremely complicated. I'm trying to picture it in my head. So I'm on a ride. I get stopped at a brake check for some reason. You go to an alternate loop, so you continue to play the background audio, all of those particular things. Maybe it completes the sequence with the animatronic and it moves around or is happy. And then as soon as you say, or as soon as the ride control says, hey, you're ready to go, you say, okay, now I jump them through this point in the scene and I trigger the next one and I put them back on the happy path.
You got it.
Am I super simplifying this?
It is a lot of complexity behind the scenes, but yes, that is what happened.
Okay, so let's do a deep dive. I know you can't really talk about particular rides that you've done, so let's just make an example to animatronic. So you're now having a ride vehicle. It comes into the scene. The roller coaster stops for a second, and the animatronic does something. What what controls the lighting and the animatronic and everything? Because at this particular point, it's not the train, right?
It can be. There's a few ways to do it, actually.
You love to say it all depends.
No, it does all depend. Really, it comes down to the architecture of the system and kind of, who's driving. So you can have on the way side, you can have a controller that's looking at all the vehicles and it's telling.
What do you mean the way side?
So the way side is offboard vehicle. It's onboard and offboard.
Okay. So that would be the example I said earlier, mental picture of a big stack of computers in a rack.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Racks like an IT room, we have all the head-end systems.
Okay. So sometimes the ride vehicle controls those scenes and they trigger it. And then sometimes they're complex enough that they have to have their own.
Yes. So some scenarios are you have the off-board system looking at all the vehicles and then it tracks where they are. And then depending on where they are, it tells them, hey, now play this, do this next. Conversely, you could have the vehicle tracking itself. The vehicle knows where it is within an environment and it reports back. It says, hey, I'm going to play this now. And it will tell the wayside, the off-board system, hey, I'm coming to this point. You need to play this animatronic now. So it could go either way.
That sounds kind of complicated, which is why they'd probably reach out to a solution architect.
Exactly. People can get very complex.
Okay, so walk me a little bit through maybe now taking it over to your career piece. How do you then get those inputs and then try to decide the best direction to take a particular ride?
That's working with a lot of the different vendors and the creative producer on board.
Okay, so you got a creative producer. Are they kind of generically over the entire project?
Yeah, they're looking at kind of the creative intent and making sure that all the other partners and vendors are adhering to kind of what the creative intent is, what they've laid out. And so then from there, from looking at the creative intent and what needs to happen, we then fine tune our different elements. So ride control, when they're sending us commands and then telling us when things are happening and how we respond to that, we might have to, change trigger time. So make something happen, a second earlier or a second later, depending on all these other elements, how long different systems take to respond to things. If we send a command to the lighting system and say, hey, turn this light on, it might take, a quarter second or 2 seconds for that to respond. And so depending on that reaction time, we have to fine tune when we're sending that play command to them.
Oh, wow. So you're looking at the synchronized their watches and you're looking at saying there's a multi-second delay and how long it takes to turn on that light. So I need to call it 2 milliseconds sooner.
Yes, exactly.
What kind of range are you talking? I said milliseconds, but I put that word in your mouth. Is it really down to that level?
It is. So our show controllers operate at like a show frame cycle. So for show video playback, some video like in film industry might be 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, 60 frames a second. So our show controllers are operating on those show cycles. So
you really are doing 30 frames per second, then you can call things at that rate. But if it shows at a different one, you have, okay, so it even depends on the show. Wow.
It does.
It is complex. So you mentioned animatronics multiple times. Do your ride control systems run the animatronics or is there a separate animatronic controller?
So as a show controller, we're looking at all the different elements of the show and communicating with those different systems, but there are other subsystems. So there is, motion control animatronics. So they have their own controllers that are, looking at all the different animatronic elements themselves and controlling their movement. We're interfacing with that controller and telling that controller what to do. So it's kind of a tiered approach with all this.
So if we ride a coaster and we realize that the audio is just a little bit off of the mouse movement, we know that they need to change the millisecond lag.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. So to kind of paint a picture of the volume, can you walk us through an example scene and maybe just give us an average, how many lights are being called, how many different speakers? I mean, it's really hard to talk generically about this, but I'd like to kind of paint a picture of it. It could be, to 30 lights. It could be how many video screens? I mean, like what's on average one of your show
really
scenes?
So if you think, you're on board a vehicle, each guest will have, 1 to 2 speakers that are full range, giving them the special effects and all the dialogue and different things, as well as like a low frequency effect for like kind of punches and kicks and the deeper effects. So you'll have, 2 to 3 speakers per guest on a vehicle. And then on the wayside, you'll have speakers, the point source speakers, like near animatronics. So for like every animatronic figure, you can have probably 1 speaker or so for those.
So it makes that sound like the audio is coming from that animatronic.
Exactly. Less like it's coming from right in front of you on board vehicle and from where the animatronic actually is in the space. And then if you have like explosions and lasers and other things going on, we use a speaker for those as well.
Okay. So it makes it the rumble sound from over here, or if it's a helicopter shooting, it comes from the helicopter. So it's directional based so that in the particular scene, you get the feeling that it's really coming from the direction of that source. Is that the term?
That point source.
Yeah. Okay. So you call them point sources?
Yes. Yep.
All right. We're getting some lingo now. I know it's hard to go through without a particular example of a particular ride, but is there any elements that we haven't really talked about that are on a dark ride or on a coaster that we haven't maybe kind of gone over in the generic example of the ride vehicle and the show system?
Well, I think, for like Rip Ride Rocket, Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket at Universal, there's the guest interface panel, the JIP. So on there, you have song selection, right?
Oh, yeah. I never thought about that.
Yeah, it makes
it from the
more
guest.
dynamic and personalized. Yeah.
Oh. Or like Test Track at Disney, where you select your car before you ever get in the ride vehicle.
Yep. Then you change.
Oh, wow.
That.
So user input, a whole entire category that I didn't mention. Any other categories like that? I know sometimes I've seen different show scenes based on the different time of day. So the show scene will turn to dark if it's at night.
There is time of day triggering.
Time of day triggering. Okay.
Yeah, our show controllers do that. So we track latitude and longitude and time zone, and can do sunrise and sunset triggers or time triggers. What else is there? I think there's also, kind of randomizing shows as well, like the Star Tours.
Or different songs based on the roll of a dice.
It's not just songs, but video content as well. As you warp and come out of warp, you might come to different planets depending on what show cycle you're on.
That's cool. I think that we drastically underestimate things when we're writing like a coaster and all the effects work. You don't notice how many components there are involved until something breaks. It's like you get on the ride vehicle and you're like, okay, none of the onboard audio is working. So because the coaster's in motion, and you said that you've got your new components, how do they get power?
Oh, that is a great question. So usually what happens is there's 2 ways to do it. Some systems, less dynamic systems like OmniMover, they're able to be continuously powered. As they go through, there are these electrical contacts that are on both the wayside and on the onboard system. They're kind of like fingers that go along a metal track, basically.
So it's like getting the power from the track?
Yes. And so
again, I'm super simplifying everything, don't I?
No, you think about the fingers just like running along like this metal track, and like they're getting power from that. Other systems like roller coasters, you can't really have that. That won't work. So what they do is they have onboard storage systems, batteries, capacitor, or something like that, where when they come into a station, they usually make that contact with those fingers still. But that power goes onto like an onboard battery, onboard capacitor, stores all the energy. And then when it leaves the station, everything's running off that battery until the next time it comes to the station.
Okay. So an example of a capacitor would be something that just charges really fast and only holds it for a short period of time. Is
Correct.
that right?
Yep.
Whereas a battery, think of your car, where it can go a few cycles without the alternator working.
Yeah.
But you still got to charge it, otherwise car doesn't work anymore. Think those electric go-karts, right? When you pull them in to change people, it's giving them a little charge, and then you go around the track again.
You've got it.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay. Well, anything else on the coaster dark ride section before we maybe pivot and talk a little bit about parades? Because I think coaster enthusiasts not only like the coasters, we like the dark ride, and I think we also can enjoy a good parade or spectacular. I think, is that what they call them now? Spectaculars?
They are spectaculars. Yeah, I will add that, the personalization of the shared experience is kind of what a lot of people are going at these days, adding complexity. Like when I was a kid going to ride ET at Universal, you go through, give them your name, and then as you're going through, ET said, right?
Right.
People love that. And so they want to see themselves become more part of the attraction.
That's a good example. I like the little ET saying your name.
Oh, it's wonderful, right? Like you feel like you're part of
Devin.
It's not just like them.
Well, before we get off, how long, and I know it's going to be a depends, but let's say a ride like you mentioned Rip Ride Rocket, how long would it take you to do your piece of, and not to say that you helped with Rip Ride Rocket, but I mean, if in a ride like that, how long would it take you to get that stroll control completely done? If you're working with a director and all these things, I'm thinking you must spend a ton of time on different show scenes, alternate show scenes, and testing all those show scenes.
Yes, and it changes depending on the other systems involved. It could be a couple weeks of work. It could be 6 months of work.
So when you before the ride, let's say you're working on a ride right now. Would you actually go through and make the car stop in the brake run, and then test the alternate scenario, and then pass off do you go through all the particular samples?
Yes.
Different. You do?
Yes. And it gets more complex because we have all these different creative people involved, right? We have the media, there's the people that are doing the video content, the audio content. And then when they come to site and the system gets turned on, you have like the mix engineers that are going to sit there and they're going to watch the video or the animatronics, and they're going to play the audio and then play it again and again and again, and like small adjustments. And they'll do that for a week or several weeks going through getting the audio mixed just right.
So walk me through that role. That is a particular type of person that comes in, and are they helping you do those micro adjustments to the audio?
Yes, they're doing it on their own workstation. So they're going to connect to our system. We're going to pass all the audio through, and then they're going to just play the scene back over and over and over again, listen to it, and make just small adjustments to the vocals and the music tracks and all the.
Because they're not just saying when does this start. They're saying this speaking needs to be louder, the background noise needs to be less, this explosion needs to be toned up or down, or the bass needs to rumble more. Oh, wow. It's so interesting to talk about all of those different pieces that we take for granted when we ride. We're so used to our happy patch.
Yeah, there's a lot of people involved in getting something built, for sure.
And I know it probably depends on how big the ride is, how complex it is. If it's just playing music on the ride vehicle, you probably have more control of all the components. And the more animatronics, the more screens, the more special effects get added, the more complex it is, the more you have to work with other people. So I think the whole thing is pretty cool. And I've always thought, man, there must be some big computers over there that do all this and make it all work, right? So, well, thanks for walking us through the coaster. So let's talk about maybe parades a bit, because I think parades, lasers have become popular now. Drones, you have so many different components in parades and water effects and floats. So how are those systems different?
They're different, and I think there's a live interactive element to them sometimes. You have live, you can have live performers. And then you also have to take into account kind of the variability. You're not on a track with the parade, right? So parade routes kind of waver a little bit.
So you don't have a set ride pass. You have a proposed ride pass?
It's fairly set, but there's, variability with it. You're not going to hit the exact same point at the exact same time every time.
And
right?
the timing will be different if a little kid walks out and they slow it down or whatever the elements are. Okay.
You have projection tied into this. You have projectors that are scattered around about that are like on the roofs of other attractions and different things. And then you also have to deal with audio. So audio going along this route, you have to synchronize to the onboard systems, the floats themselves, as well as the speakers that are like on poles around the guests that are attached to attractions, which are usually isolated. So now you're feeding audio into these isolated attractions, trying to create this cohesive soundscape throughout the area.
Oh, so they could be playing background music for the whole parade, but the parades still have their own audio. And then, so when we talked about the coasters, we talked about scenes. Is that the same concept for parades?
It is, though it's a bit harder to control because, coaster, you're a single attraction. You're isolated. You have control over everything.
Right.
Where you're at a parade, parades are going past multiple attractions, all these different independent systems that you're trying to now bring together.
Okay. Is that why earlier you mentioned GPS?
Yes. So the variability in the ride path, with GPS, we can get time data as well as physical position. And we can set a range within, the trigger point. We can set it for, a few meters or several meters out, so that if we get within that range, we'll trigger, the different effects.
Okay. And then are you then having a ride control system that tells the float to do things, or is the float telling the wayside, you called it wayside, right? The big computer to do things?
There's a bit of an orchestration between the two, depending on the complexity of the show. If the wayside is just doing general background and the floats are playing back their own audio, then the floats those onboard systems are going to trigger themselves based on where they are and when they need to trigger. But if there's, orchestrated effects going on, say, there's, synchronization between the wayside audio and the onboard audio, then we'd have to, treat that as one big show and make sure that everybody's, getting the right cues at the right time, and all the clocks and all the different show controllers are all coordinated.
So just like on the coasters, you synchronize your clocks, so everyone's got the exact same time down to the millisecond.
Yes.
And then the floats go through based on GPS. They trigger different events along the way. And then you mentioned lasers and special effects. I'm assuming water effects, things like that. How do you coordinate the audio? If it's like, or do you even go to this level where the animatronic talks? You would have to tell the wayside to do the audio, or is an animatronic / float always have its own audio, and the wayside just does support? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think with that, yes, there is the same level of coordination with fine tuning those triggers for the laser effects and for the water effects. Often with those, you're going to want to, create an impact, an explosion. So you have the water cannon go off as you're playing a sound effects, as you maybe have some pyro or some lighting effects that are all creating this feel of this explosion. Those are all different systems with their own controllers that are all being orchestrated with one of the show controllers. And so we have to make sure that the timing and the response between all of them is precise. Otherwise, the effect will kind of be lost.
So the same thing you talked about on the ride vehicle, you run that particular scene from the start of the trigger of the float GPS. Everybody's synchronized to that particular scene. And then you control the special effects based on those millisecond changes you were talking about earlier.
Precisely, yes.
Okay, cool. Man, so I'm just picturing the first time you run it, how everything's, how close do you get it on the first go?
Oh no, it's chaos. We started off with things that have the wrong like IP address or wires aren't connected, and it's just all sorts of things go on that it takes a lot of time to figure out what's going on and get everybody talking.
Okay, so the first time you run the parade, you probably don't have any of the people there. Do you do a simulation? Like, do you run, you were talking about looking up your laptop and stuff like that and different people doing that. Do you actually run simulations first?
Yeah, for not just parades, but, all these other systems, we do demos where we'll have, the vehicle either on a test track or just stationary, and we'll connect up to it and simulate a show going.
Oh, so you're saying now you're entering show scene 5 and you trigger it and everybody watches the effects?
Yes. Yep. Exactly.
So can you do that without even the right vehicle being there?
We can with the hardware. It's having all the physical things in there to make sure it's all working together.
And this is why you hear stories of people testing fireworks off like at night after the park is closed or stuff like that. That's what you're there at 10 o'clock at night running these things after the park closes.
Oh, absolutely.
How late do some of those go? I probably know the answer, right?
And it depends, especially if you're trying to work around the schedules of operating attractions. I mean, you're going all night until sunrise till that attraction open.
So you're basically running third shift-ish?
You're on third shift. And it gets worse if you're trying to do an upgrade for something. So you have to take time to test the new hardware and software and then convert everything back to what it was before so the show can open up again.
Wait. Can you give me an example, like a show scene changing? So like a different animatronic that gets added. So you load a whole entire new sequence, test it, and then put it all back to the way it was before you got there?
Oh, absolutely. We get, changes to content. We get new content. We get new things added to scenes. We get new hardware. And, as we're doing testing to prove that it all works out, we have to go in there at night and change.
I never thought about maintenance too, right? So if something goes down or something changes and then you get a replacement, like maybe animatronic would be the best example of that. You have to retest the animatronic and all the triggers?
Oh, absolutely. Any change that you have to retest. And it brings up another good point. Say you have an attraction that's operating, there are certain elements that the attraction can't operate without. So like certain projection scenes and things like that. If you're going through and there's a scene where you don't see Harry Potter at all, that's not going to work, right? So they'll bring the attraction down. But there are other elements that they can run without. But depending on, say you have an animatronic or something that's not operating, you could have different versions of the show that exclude like audio and things for that animatronic if we know it's not operating.
Yeah. And that gets back to that earlier when I said what we refer to as the B like, oh man, I got the B show.
Yeah, exactly.
So is it really called the B show, or did us coaster enthusiasts just kind of name that kind of?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm picturing in my head like things like, look out for the Whomping Willow, but the Whomping Willow doesn't whomping. The show goes on, but if some other element that was a big part, you would just close the ride.
Correct. Yes.
How or who decide that?
That depends on operations.
So they decide what's quote unquote important key elements.
They identify, ahead of time, what's key and what's not, and there's different levels of it, and so depending on what's down, and they'll operate or they won't operate.
Well, I sure pivoted off parades back to coasters, so you can tell where my excitement is, huh? All right. So anything else on parades since I pivoted us back to ride control and rides?
I don't think so. I think that pretty much covered it.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you kind of walking through, giving us a good overview of how all of these components work together. And is there any advice you'd give to some budding coaster enthusiasts that would love to do what you did 20 years ago and get into show scenes and lighting and sound?
Oh, absolutely. I think, getting out there, going to events, meeting people, show your enthusiasm, I think, and your eagerness really goes a long way, I think. And then do training as much as you can. Here at Alcorn McBride, we have training with our hardware, our show control systems. We teach people how to build an attraction. And we welcome everybody to come by and do it. We get a lot of college students come through, people that are just getting into the industry, that kind of want to test the waters and see if it's something they want to do. They come on by for 2 days and go through training and see if it's something that they really enjoy.
I noticed you also have online courses. Is that for people who are already in the industry for a specific part of a new component? Or is that similar to your in-person?
Somewhat a mix of both. If we have new components, new things come out, we'll do videos on those. But the other modules are like an introduction into show control and audio and video and lighting and other things. So it's a good place to start for sure. Go through all those online modules. And then if you're really interested, go and sign up for some in-person training, I think.
Well, I think it's interesting. The more advanced everything gets, the more tech. I wouldn't call it programming because that's maybe you call it programming. So maybe it is programming. But I mean, like even people are doing Christmas lights and synchronizing Christmas lights with music. And they're doing Tesla shows where the lights and the doors do crazy things. So it's amazing how much, like, I wouldn't call it cross training, but anything you do in those components, I think gives you a taste of how complex it is to get all those components to fire at the same time. You kind of start to understand triggering, and all those things that you deal with every single day. So I appreciate you painting pictures for people and doing a deep dive, because I think sometimes we take your job for granted.
No problem. Always glad to talk about it. I think it's super interesting to get in the weeds on all the different technologies out there and how the theme parks are using it.
And I don't know if it's worth pitching or talking about, but APL is where I physically met you in person, and it usually revolves around IAPA. Do you want to pitch that at all, or?
Absolutely. So we're doing ATL again this year. ATL is the Attractions Technology Lab. It's a show that we put on in collaboration with other partners of the ATC, the Attractions Technology Collaborative. So every year around IAPA, we do a showcase of different technologies using all the different partners. We have lighting partners and animatronics, video players and ride vehicle systems. So this year we're doing ATL a bit different than we have in the past. We have a lot of partners involved that are taking on different elements. So we have, a dark ride lab, we have an immersive experience lab, and then we have a walking showcase with different technologies on display. And this year we're going to have ATL the week before IAPA. So it'll be...
so it's not going to be during IAPA?
Well, both. So we start the show the Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday before IAPA. And it's free to come by. You just have to register. And it will be at Oceaneering Entertainment's facility here in Orlando, off of Sand Lake.
And for those of you guys who don't know, that's an easy drive or Uber from the convention center, it's down. It's in the same general location.
It is, yes. And then something new that we're doing this year is during the week of IAPA, that Tuesday, we're going to have an IAPA Edu Tour happening. So we partnered up with IAPA, and you can sign up for it as part of your IAPA experience. And what they'll do is they'll bring you on bus over to Oceaneering's facility that Tuesday, and we'll do a 4-hour guided tour of the ATL. Where we'll have like a Q&A, talk about what's going on with the different technologies and kind of the idea behind ATL as we walk you through every one of the labs.
Do you think the IAPA Expo is one of your key? It seems to be, for this particular industry, it seems to be one of the main shows. Is that
it? It is one of the main shows. I think it's definitely the biggest showcase of all the different partners that we have. There are other shows that are helpful as well to talk about different technologies on different scales, but I think IAAPA is the key one for attractions and amusement parks.
Well, there's so many things that we didn't talk about. I haptic feedback on ride vehicles, like all kinds of different particular stuff. But I think we definitely kind of walked through in a couple examples, and I really appreciate you doing this without talking about individual rides, because I do understand all of the it's not called non-compete. What's it called?
Non-disclosure.
Non-disclosure. Non-disclosure agreements. So I know this was a difficult interview to do without talking about individual things. So I appreciate you navigating that for us.
No worries. Yeah, I'd love to talk about specific attractions. I think there's a lot of really cool ones out there. I think a lot of fun things going on. So,
do you want to talk about a few of your favorite attractions?
Oh man, sure. I think for me, some of the coolest stuff I'm seeing lately are the big reveals that Disney's doing. I think the reveal on Guardians Cosmic Rewind, that one is one of my favorites. I think Tron has a good reveal these days. It's fun going through the queue line and being in one room and then suddenly you're somewhere else. It's great. Yeah,
it is definitely cool, and it's hard not to spoil it.
I know. Yeah,
I had to stop watching POVs personally because I kept spoiling myself, and I don't want to spoil myself anymore. And then you get so excited to talk about it, but you can't talk about it without spoiling it for the other person unless they already rode the ride. So
it's so much fun. I went with my girlfriend actually 2 weeks ago. She had never ridden Guardians, so we're sitting there waiting for the reveal, and I'm waiting for her reaction to it.
It's fun to live that through other people. But if it's one of the rides you did, there's no reveal because you already knew everything. It's like your job spoiled it for you. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, and we can leave your contact information in the show notes, and we'll also leave links to the ATL information in the show notes.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you again to Devin Flannery from Alcorn McBride for chatting with us today, and to all of you for tuning in and listening to our audio. Don't forget to check the website, ridewithace.com, and remember that Ace is everywhere you consume your social media, on Facebook, X, Threads, Pinterest, LinkedIn. Make sure you're subscribed to Ace's pages on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, and Discord. Follow Ace everywhere to stay on top of all the coaster and park news coming out, and to hear what your Ace membership has to offer. Thanks for listening. Hope you get to ride a coaster today.
Ride With Us is produced by the American Coaster Enthusiasts, a registered 501c3 organization. Visit ridewithace.com for additional information, and we will see you at the parks.